All right, so we're going to go through some different parts. I know we're kind of past lunchtime, but I'm trying to cram this in. So please just bear with me. Hopefully some of the Mighty Maka was helpful. Now, where we are, we've started the money section, and we're starting to dig into this. So this can be sort of the emotional piece that's coming up. We've sort of worked. And so a couple things I want to say at this point is that we have our psychology. And a lot of the psychologies come from our past and the different things. So I don't want any of us to feel good. I don't want us to feel bad. I don't want to think we've sort of fucked things up and made a lot of mistakes. The past is erased. Remember what I said early on? It's from this day forward. So whatever we've done in the past, any mistakes we've made, believe me, I've made every mistake in the book. Nobody's probably made more mistakes than I have in this room, and I can probably, if it's a competition, I'll win. Not that I'm competitive or anything. No, yeah, exactly. But let's get over our psychology. It doesn't matter. Whatever's happened in the past does not matter, because the beauty of now is we get to invent moving forward and be at peace with that. So everybody just say, I'm good enough just the way I am. Just good enough. The past is behind me. And my future's ahead, and it's my future, gosh darn it. It's my life. I'm owning it. I'm going to flow it. I'm going to make it happen. And separate some of the stuff, the noise from the rest of the world, the stuff from the rest of the world. This is ours. The beauty and why I'm so touched by you all being here is because this is our group of people. We're different. I think why I always resonated with the Apple ads. It's like, it's the sort of the iconoclast. It's the misfits. We just sort of dance to the, something of our own tune or whatever that. Thank you. That one. Yeah. Anyway, so this is ours. We're going to own it. We're going to live it. We're going to love it. Let it go. And let's learn and move forward. And I'm teaching this a little bit differently too. So we get to invent it and make it ours anyway. So part of our cash flow system, part of our money method is the different parts. And we're replacing the old, antiquated, constrictive, boring budget. So the first part was our cash flow chart. And then the second part was starting to look at the cash flow categories. And now here's really where the magic happens. And I think this really helps, especially couples. I know this has really helped Gary and me. This was sort of the transformational part of our being. And here's the reasons why. Because we attract our financial opposites most of the time. So an example of that is I tend to be more of the spender, and Gary's more of the saver. So it can be a lot of conflict there. I like to spend, he likes to save. And so we would bump up against that, and because who's right and who's wrong? And how much should I spend and how much should we save? And so reading these different books, there's no real formula for it. It's like save this, but then there's investments and there's savings, and save this amount. And I couldn't figure it out. So it's, again, the iterative process of working through it, and then this is working. And this has been 10 years in the making, really, to come up with this simple formula I'm going to give you. And this is what I think the magic for everyone, but especially for couples, because it can take the arguments right out of the equation. It can take the differences between the spender and saver completely. There's no right or wrong. No one's the better or the worse of the two. Because guess what? To have balance, you have to have both. We have to spend and we have to save. Now, the great thing about this method is you get to spend to save. So us spenders, we get to spend more money. And feel really good about it. So on the formula, the cash flow formula, which is the third part, so it's the cash flow formula. All right, so we had our above the line, right? We had our gross cash inflow minus what? Right? Minus what? Right? Leaves us what? Our spending cash. Excellent, good job. All right, so we're just going to ignore this. We're going to work on this later. So what happens, it really doesn't matter how much is taken out for taxes, and it doesn't matter how much we take out investments right now. And this is different for everyone anyway. So all we're going to do is focus on spending right now. Because once you take this out, this becomes 100%. Because that's not our money. We're talking about 100% of our money. Do you follow? So we're at 100% right here, but it's below the line. This doesn't exist because it's not our money. All right, so now we're taking out our ARM. And ARM, remember, is required expenses. These are survival expenses. Our ARM expenses, we don't have a choice. If we don't pay them, there's consequences. So what are examples of ARM expenses? Mortgage payments. What did you all find in your ARM? Insurance payments. Utilities. Yes. Food, groceries, healthcare, transportation. So our house payment, our car payments, if we have them, our utilities, all our groceries, all the required things. So, and the way I think about it, mostly are survival expenses. So if we don't have a roof over our head, there's big consequence. So mortgage, rent, whatever it is, we have to have a roof over our heads. So that's a survival expense. How much is another story. We have to have utilities. We have to have transportation, and cars are very convenient for transportation, right? Versus a bus. Now, Ubers are becoming pretty convenient these days, so we might not need 2 cars. Who knows? But that might be another way to just get rid of some of that extra excess, but that's another story. We need to take care of our bodies and health care, so that's a required expense. And there's all the insurance and all the pieces. We have to eat and put food in our bodies. So those are all required. So it's the required expenses to survive. The amount we spend of those is our choice, but otherwise it's not our choice. Makes sense. So those things all fall in our ARM, despite how much we spend on them. So that's ARM. Any questions on ARM? Right? Okay. Now again, like I said before, many times where we get into trouble is our ARM is mixed up with our luxuries. Like it's just all in a budget somewhere. And then we can get so microscopic numbers down here trying to figure out these teeny tiny expenses or amounts we're spending. And we're really complicating these things. Remember, our goal is to what? Simplify. This is all about simplification. Let's get our life back. Who wants to spend an extra hour looking at these little bitty numbers that at the end of the day probably don't matter? I'd rather have my hour back unless I have to. So that's our ARM. So the next category is luxuries. So luxuries is everything that's not our ARM and isn't anything that's our investing or savings. So it's really everything else. And our luxuries are luxury spending because anything that's not required is a luxury. So that's what I want us to start thinking. Everything else is a luxury. Now, there are schools of thought that if you haven't saved enough and you haven't invested enough and you haven't saved enough, that we're going to talk about in a second, you don't get any luxury. And then some people just don't save and invest anything, or invest and save, I put them in that order, but they don't invest and save anything, and then they spend a lot on luxury. I think it's both. I mean, because it's not realistic that we're not going to throw a few luxury items in. That's life. So let's be real. And we're going to talk about in a second, we're just going to be more selective. But the only way we can select our luxuries, be selective with our luxuries, is if we differentiate them, if we separate the two, if we categorize them. And that's part of the cash flow categories. So that's why we want to separate our ARM required expenses from our luxuries, because we can't really change these unless we start making some big decisions. But we can change our luxury decisions very quickly. Get rid of the cable bill. You know, get rid of the extra shopping at Nordstrom's. You know, get rid of whatever it is. But we want to look at these because where I want us to go with this luxuries is, remember, especially some of the minimalistic sort of philosophy. I think when we have too much luxury, we can't appreciate what we have. And there's Parkinson's law that says every luxury becomes a necessity. So then all these luxury becomes necessities, then we don't think we can live without them, and then we get in just that whole mindset and it turns into more stuff and that sort of thing. So I'm trying to puncture some of that and reshape our thinking in a way that let's appreciate the luxury. Let's be very selective with it. Let's choose the luxury that's meaningful. So then we have to sort of think, what is meaningful? Is the new pair of shoes meaningful, or is it retail therapy? Which sometimes maybe can be meaningful, but you know what I'm saying? Or is it just a habit? That's what I do, is when I'm bored, I go shopping and I put things on the credit card. So I just want us to, again, be more intentional and think, if I buy this as a luxury or I do this for myself, is it meaningful? And just have that little time out to ask ourselves a question when it comes to spending. Because I think then it's not right or wrong, it's not you're spending too much, or am I feeling bad, or I did this. We're owning our lives back. We're owning our appreciation back. And we're just saying, this is important to me because. And then when you start getting in that practice, you just realize that there's not a lot of stuff that's all that meaningful. A lot of the stuff we pay money for is for stuff that we put in a cabinet or something. So, it gives you a lot of flow time back, a lot of flow state back, especially when you don't have bills and these different things. You eliminate. Again, it's more freedom. So that's what I want us to do, is be more conscientious and selective with choosing our luxuries with things that are meaningful. And, we're really getting to the point, it's like to buy time back versus things. So it's like buying time in the sense that somebody makes our dinners versus maybe buying more stuff. It's, and we're really working to buy more doing versus more having. So just to look at what can we do that creates experience, because money is not a source of happiness. Money funds things that can make us happy, but money is not the source. What is the source of happiness? Experiences. It's all in the doing, not in the having. Because anything we have, we might be happy for a little while, like the brand new car might make us happy for a couple months, but then it wears off and it's just another car, or whatever the case is. But those experiences last our lifetime. Like when you're sitting down in conversations and we talk about, oh, we just went to Italy. Well, we just went to Italy. Well, where'd you go? We went there too. And oh my God, did you see such? We did. And the food. And you said you're from Italy. And oh my gosh, we were there. Do you say, okay, I bought this new pair of shoes and...
Nobody wants to hear about that.
It's just not experiential. You could say, like, hey, look at my shoes. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with, there's zero judgment. So when I'm saying this, like, buy your shoes if they make you happy. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying, like, happiness is an experience. Happiness is in these magic moments. Happiness is the flow state. When you just own it, it's just coming to you and you just get to transmit it. Happiness is not buying more stuff. And when we do feel a little euphoria, because guess what? Shopping does spike the dopamine. Can become a drug. It's our bodies. Remember, Leanne was talking about the brain. There's all these chemicals in the brain that's where I see in the woo-woo thing. Now that I'm studying more of the woo-woo that I thought was woo-woo, it's all scientific. We have MRIs now that can show this woo-woo shit that we thought was woo-woo is actually now very scientific and real, right? It's like, so maybe that's what I need. It's like, oh, it's real. I can now believe it to be true. But it's just the dopamine, these different things, even when we start studying chemicals in the brain, and I've been studying a lot of neuroscience, we can be aware of that. Like, oh, that's dopamine. Dopamine's very short. It spikes, makes us happy. Drugs is dopamine. The thing with Coke and these different sugar rise. That's why we have these sugar addictions. It's dopamine to the brain. And it makes us feel really good, but for a short period of time, it wears off, and then what happens? We want more, we want more, we want crash, and we want more. So shopping can be a form of addiction, dopamine addiction, really no different than bad addictions, but sugar's that same thing. So anything with luxuries, when we can make it more about more doing versus more having and be more selective, then the things that we do have, we can really appreciate because they have meaning. We buy them on purpose, and we can get out of just this. I think so many times we're just in this drift. I don't know if any of you have read the book Napoleon Hill, his latest book. That's a really cool story. I won't go into it. But it's Outwitting the Devil, and it's all about drift. If you haven't read Napoleon Hill's Outwitting the Devil, it's like a must read. Of course, Napoleon Hill, one of the first books I ever read, Think and Grow Rich. And read the story about this book. It's pretty amazing. But he talks about drift. And it's really drift is when we're not in control anymore. We're just drifting through life. And we're not producing our own flow. The current of life is taking us downstream versus us directing the flow where we want it to go. So that's the thing with luxuries, is just look at them. And part of the system here, the method, is to separate them so that we can look and start being selective. And the exercise here is when we look at that, and especially with our spouse, is to go through it together and say, is this meaningful to us? Well, I don't care about, well, this is really meaningful to me. And then respect the other spouse. Like, listen if it is meaningful to them. And maybe it's meaningful right now because I have a little bit of a tough time letting go, but maybe 6 months from now, once you get into the practice of this, it's like, that really isn't meaningful. So give it some space and some time too, to work through this stuff. Like life doesn't usually happen immediately. You know, we have to sort of evolve into new ways of thinking and being. But that's just it. It's a beautiful exercise. And Gary and I do this regularly, and this is changes on a regular basis now. We have our own growth and say, you know, we can get rid of that now. It just doesn't even matter now that we are where we are versus a year ago, we thought it did. Does that make sense? So that's arms and luxuries. Then the third one is savings. And savings, savings is spending. So this is where I want you to spend as you save. I mean, you're going to spend to save. What is savings?
Savings, pure savings, rainy day.
That's one form of savings. Yes, that's a type of saving for a rainy day. But what is savings?
It's a mechanism to increase capacity for the future.
Yes. So in layman's terms, for the rest of us, yes, no, I'm joking. It's future spending. So all savings is future spending. So the reason why I say it's saving is spending, or spending is saving, is because it is spending. It's just future spending and not now spending. But it's still spending. So as spenders, we still get to spend it. We just are spending it, our future self is spending it versus our current self spending it. Does that make sense? So that's why saving is spending. It's just spending in the future, because that's all savings is. Because we don't save money to not spend it, do we? Does anybody save money to never spend it? It's all about spending. So that's just it. We're going to save to spend. We're going to spend to save. And that's all it is. And then so again, we're differentiating it because savings is a different type of spending. ARM is one type of spending. It's for required spendings. Luxuries, we're being very selective about this because those are the luxury spendings. And this is a different type of spending. This is a future self spending, but it's all spending. We only save to spend.
But I thought the investment is to provide the income in the future.
Investment.
All of that income in the future is going to be your spending.
All right, so let's wait on that. Okay, so hold off. This is long-term future self-spending. This is short-term future safe spending, because there's a difference between spending and savings and investment. And this is one thing that really drives me crazy about the financial planning books, and it's a source of confusion, especially for most people. It confused me for a long time. Like this formula, again, when I give it to you, it's so simple, but it took so much working for me to get here. And the thing is just because it wasn't clear in the bazillion books I read. Because everybody says save 15%. Well, is that investing or is that saving? And are they the same thing? And and where do you invest? And where do you put this in that whole budget thing? And then they say rainy day, but where does that thing fit in? I could never make sense of it because they talked about all these things isolated and never anything in a big system. And I was like, no, this is systematic. It all has to work together. You can't just take one component and teach it when it's not connected to how money flows and how it operates. So savings, investments are two different things. Investments is for the long-term future. That's for our long-term future self. I'm going to talk about that when we get to the investment section. But the way I think about this, let me ask you this. I'm a little ahead of the game here, but who would love it if their ARM and their luxuries were completely paid for every single month by a trust fund? What if Aunt Betty left you a trust fund and paid 100% of your ARM and your luxuries? How would that feel? Wouldn't Aunt Betty? Love you, Aunt Betty. Wouldn't we just love her? Like, here, Paul and Margaret, here's, for the rest of your life, your ARM and your luxuries are covered by the trust fund I'm giving you. How would you feel? Sold? Why don't you jump up and down? Like, yeah, Aunt Betty. Right. So again, I think our financial planning world's made things so freaking complex and difficult and hard to reach and hard to make sense of. Well, guess what this is? It's Aunt Betty. You're your own trust fund. We're our own trust fund. We're Aunt Betty. So this is Aunt Betty producing our trust fund over the next 20 years so that when we don't work for a living anymore, our trust fund takes over. But we use this word investment, and we use all these words that are in these investor words, and it's just hard, like investments, like what is that, and how boring, and do I have to? It's like it's our trust fund. We get a trust fund. I get a trust fund. I don't get one. I get what it is. But it's like, oh, this is our trust fund, right? So that's investment. It's for a long-term future self. It's taking care of our future self someday when we retire, whatever retirement wanes. And that's a whole different conversation, because I think even that word is so lost because we don't really, it's just a financial planning term and we don't really know what it means. We just nod our heads yes with the financial planners. But it's future self. An investment is long-term future self spending so that the day that we quit working with our bodies, our assets provide the cash flow. Now here's another thing, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. But this is called the cash flow system. We talk about these investments like they mean something, but if they don't provide cash, can you live off of gold in a bank? No. Can you live off a car? Can you live off your house? Everything's about cash flow, but nobody talks about cash flow. 100% cash flow. Everything we're doing is cash flow. Cash flow now for our current self, or cash flow in the future for our future self. Cash flow. Everything. Cash flow, cash flow, cash flow system with a K. So that's investment. Savings is for our short-term future needs in the next year, maybe 24 months. So investments, these are typically not liquid. We're investing in assets. We don't plan to tap into that trust fund for however long in the future. This we might need to tap into next month. So that's the difference. So this comes up first because this is our future self. This is really our current self. Let's just say our current self is the next 24 months. Does that make sense? Not the next 20 years. But the financial planning books don't tell you this. Like all the money books don't tell you this. So it's very distinct. And I'm going to go through the formula here in a second. Do y'all follow? Yes. So that's savings. So savings is just current self future spending in the next however long. And in savings, I want you to think of it, I call it insurance. So we have insurance, right? What do we have insurance for? Surprise things. But we have insurance. Why? Because if we get in a car wreck, that $60,000 car, we don't want to pay cash for it. So we have insurance. We have health insurance. Why? Because when we break our leg, to go to a hospital these days, it's like $1 million. So we have health insurance. We have house insurance. So when the tornado comes through in Austin once in a million years and takes your roof off, you don't have to pay $10,000 for a roof. We get it. That's insurance. So this is our self-insurance. So all our savings, these are investments. This is our self-insurance. So that when life happens, in the unpredictable near future, we have money set aside. Because if we're running, most of us run pretty close to net zero with our spending. So if we don't have the money set aside, clearly it goes on a credit card for most people. And the average credit card expense that people put on their credit card for people that aren't doing this is $2,000 a year. Unplanned expenses are $2,000 a year for the average. Now those of us that have higher monthly expenses, that can be much bigger than that, right? Hardwood floors with your faucet, a leaky faucet, you go home, you go away for 3 days, and you come home and you have a leak, a plumbing leak in your hardwood floors, 20 grand, not covered by insurance, right? Not that that's ever happened, but so that's why the savings is, but it's your self-insurance. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a second. And then the finally one, if you have personal debt, this is debt reduction. And the thing is debt, many of us have it, student loans or credit card debt. Again, if we have it, no big deal. Many of us don't, but if we do, we need a plan for paying that off. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Again, simple, easy peasy. And you pay it off so fast and then reallocate the money, and it's really fun, and life can change very fast. We're taking control. We own it. So here's the magic. Are you ready? You want to hear? So taxes and investments, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to use an example here to make the numbers make more sense. So let's just say our gross cash is $100,000. All right? So and I'm going to take off $20,000 for taxes, because when I looked up on the IRS website, it said for $100,000 it was roughly, with normal deductions, taxes was roughly $20,000. Now, the rule of thumb is to invest 15%. Not save with investments in there, but just investments for the long-term future self is a minimum of 15%. Gary and I and most of us in this room probably invest greater than that, but that's the bare minimum to make sure you can stay on track. So that's 15,000. And why did I use 100,000 as an example? It's easy math. So this gives us 65,000. So 65,000 is how much?
65%.
So that it's 100%. Well done. So that's the thing. We think it's 65. This is 100%. Because that doesn't matter. Our 15% is not ours. It's off in La La Land. Taxes is with beautiful Uncle Sam that we love giving all of our hard-earned money to. And this is what we have to spend. This is our spending cash, which now that's 100%. This is the difference. Everything else is based on gross income, and you can't do it off gross income, but because these things changes, who knows what their taxes are going to be in the future. This stays pretty consistent, but this may even go up and down. It's variable. This is what we're doing. It's 100%. So now this is where it makes our lives much easier, because I'm going to give you the formula, which is your spending allowance. So who's ever given their kids a spending allowance? What happens if your kids overspend? So sorry, figure it out.
Yes.
Right? So we tell our kids, like, sorry, if that's your allowance. If you go overboard, not my problem, yours. Well, we're giving ourselves the same spending allowance and the same discipline and accountability as we do our children, right? Because we want to lead by example. My dad was always like, because I told you so. Not, don't do what I say, just do it because I told you so. So our arm shouldn't be more than 70% of our spending cash. That's the max. So that's the allowance. Remember, we get to spend 100% of our spending cash. So our allowance is 70% of our spending cash. So how much is 70% of 65,000? Okay? So that's our ARM allowance on an annual basis. Okay? Now, it's really easy. Can you remember this? $70, $10, $10, $10. So this is the allowance. We get 10% for 10% of that for our luxuries, 10% for our savings, and 10%. Those are all of our allowance. So what's 10% of 65,000? Again, I can do this math. So this is our annual allowance for our luxuries, our annual allowance for our savings, and our allowance for debt reduction. Make sense? Okay, so that's what we fill in, and everything goes towards this. So now, why do a lot of people, why are they not putting their 15% of their gross in here and their 10% of their spending cash here? They're doing off their gross. The numbers don't make sense. These things are variable. That's why this is always the same. It's always just 100%, because once you have this number, it can vary. The only time it varies for those of us in real estate, of course, this gross cash is the same, but the formula always stays the same. That's why this works for those of us that have variable incomes on a month-to-month basis. And that's why you need these reserves, you need these savings, because sometimes you have to borrow from yourself. You become your own banker and borrow for yourself to make ends meet. And that rainy day fund, but it doesn't affect, you're still working off the formulas, and you just loan yourself the difference if you need to, but we're not going to get into that. So with this, I'm going to talk about savings and with debt reduction, but here's where I want you to see. Let's pretend you have debt. So the goal here is when you have debt, this is to amplify your debt payoff. So now let's pretend we have debt and we just paid it off. Where do we put that 10%? We could put it anywhere, but the goal is to go 70, 30. So to put that 10 here. So it's, 80, 20. Sorry, that's what it is. So 80% on our ARM and luxuries and 20 towards savings is sort of the goal. So it's 80, 20. 80% spending, 20% future spending. Until you fill your buckets that I'm going to talk about here in a second. Once your buckets are full, then you can even allocate more here. So now, number one, we tend to not invest enough and save enough because we have some debt we're paying down. Number two, maybe our luxuries are too high, so just too much luxury spending. And then sometimes our ARM is too high. We're over the 70%. What usually drives our ARM up too high?
Big house.
A big house. So Margaret, what is the, assuming you have no other debt, what is the debt to income ratio that you'll lend for borrowers buying a house? Up
40%
40% of?
gross.
So here's the thing. So let's do, if you'll get your calculator, let's do some quick, good old HP. I can never figure out the backwards math. But okay, so let's just do some quick math to see how this works. So Margaret, who's in the lending business, if you need a mortgage, go to her. She's amazing. So she's got, she'll lend us 40% of our gross income. So she'll lend us $40,000, right?
Right.
So she'll loan us $40,000 for a mortgage to max it out. 40% of gross. Does everybody follow? Now, with our formula to stay within our allowance, we can't do more than 40% of our spending cash.
Right.
So what's 40% of 65,000?
61%. I mean,
So what's 45% of 65,000? What's the number?
let's see. 65,000. 41, is that what you said? 40% of that? 26, yeah.
So 26,000. So what's minus 40 minus 26,000? Do lenders care if you're investing and saving? Do they care if you go on vacation? Do they care if your kids get funded education? They've got their whole algorithm to max it out to get as much return at the least amount of risk, and that's where it winds up. They think they can do that lowest risk at that formula. So what our spending allowance is saying, we don't get more than 26,000, but the lenders are lending us 40,000 per year. That's 14,000. Who's getting our 14 grand? The lender. I am in a school of thought, let's be our own banker. Let's pay ourselves that 14 grand. Why give it to the banks for a bigger house? Because most of us don't need the big house we live in anyway. So if we're our own banker and we're paying ourselves first, sometimes this can be really hard for couples. This is where it can get, but you just work through it. You don't have to do it right away. You just talk about it, and again, it's over time. But it's just 14,000. Would we rather send that 14 grand and max out what the lenders will give us? Or we'd rather throw it here every single year? Now, when you look at an additional 14,000 a year and you compound it over 25, 35, 40 years, those numbers get really big really fast. That 14 grand is real money. The banks know that. That's why the lenders want your 14 grand. Your lenders want the 14 grand extra because they make a boatload of money, and we're giving it to them when we can fund ourselves. So that's another mindset I want, is become your own banker. We become our own banker. So that's part of the ARM here. Now the second thing is we have car payments, right? So we have car payments that are in our ARM. For those of us who have car payments, Gary and I own our cars outright, and we drive them until they fall apart. But our ARM is, do you know that 95% of cars traded in are not paid for? So that means we're not trading car for car, we're trading car payment for car payment. And now imagine, the average car payment is about $475 a month, so let's round it up to $500. If we invest it, so we're paying now the car companies, loan companies, whatever, we're paying the mortgage company, our max, and we're not paying ourselves that $14,000 to become our own banker. So now we're paying the car payments. Many times people have 2 car payments. Again, nothing, no good or bad, we might all have a car payment. That's okay. I would just want to shift maybe some thinking here. Because what's happened is debt has become so prevalent in our society, it's so normalized that we can't imagine a house without a house payment. We can't imagine a car without a car payment. We can't imagine a college education without a student loan. And we can't imagine a credit card without a balance. And the thing is, it's normal. But that normal is very stressful, and it causes a lot of tension, and it hurts our marriages more than anything. So now with cars, if we have a car payment, let's just pretend now, remember, we want to become our own banker. So let's pretend instead of paying the $500 a month towards the car payment company, whatever they are, car lenders, all the car companies make more on their financing than they do on the selling the cars. So let's pretend we pay ourselves $500 to invest versus a car company. In 25 years, that's $500,000. That's a $500,000 car that's sitting there. Now, what if we were to do this since for 40 years? It's $1.5 million. So most of us, 95% of us, trade car payment for car payment. That means we're having at least one or more car payments for pretty much our entire life because it's so normal. It's $1.5 million over our sort of driving adult lifetime. Real money, right? But it's just so normalized, we don't realize that compounding, we don't realize what we're doing. So that's where we want to look at our arm and just say, hey, do we need that extra car payment? Or hey, do we want this $14,000? And he might say, maybe we're all in this, and maybe life is just great and it's all meaningful, and that's okay too. We just want to make sure that our future self is going to become our current self one day, and once we quit working, somebody's got to fund that lifestyle, that trust fund. And Social Security ain't it. So that's savings. And then the final thing is debt reduction. And debt reduction, I'll show you after lunch. We'll do a quick exercise there. So that's it. It's so let's do this. I think this is $540 a month, 540, and this is $37.80 a month. Our allowances for this $100,000 example. All right, does that make sense? So now it's like, okay, I'm the spender, Paul, you're the saver, and I get to spend my $540 a month on whatever we want. And exactly, like maybe it's just a purse that month, one purse. And you get to spend for the $500 a month for savings. So we both win. So we both win. And this is why it works for Gary and me. And here's the thing, now with our luxuries, it used to be before we had this worked out, his box, this is probably pre-Amazon, but now he has his Amazon boxes that get delivered to the door. Right. And before I'd be like, what is he buying? Because I hadn't approved it. You know what I mean? Like the wife approved. And then I would have my Amazon boxes, and he doesn't care as much, but he would still look like, why do you need more that? Whatever it is, yeah. Girl things, like why more girl things? Yeah. And before it would cause tension, because he's like, we don't need that. And I'd say, you don't need that another tool set thing or whatever the hell it is. Like, and so again, it'd just be one more source of argument or conflict. But now it's like we're well within our luxury spending, and now it's just a different mood. He has his Amazon boxes show up, and I look at him, I'm laughing, I'm like, I'll never get it. But I don't care because it's within our luxury spending. And my Amazon boxes show up, and he smiles and shakes his head because he'll never get it, but he doesn't care because we're all within our luxury spending. Yeah. It's all allocated, and now the only time there'd be an argument is if we went over our allowance. But we don't because this is our agreement. So it's all gone, and he gets to spend, and he does all his fancy smancy automated stuff that will teach you blah, 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 and I get to have more Amazon boxes, and life is really, really happy at home. Do you have any questions? Is it simple?
It's great.
And so when you're in this, spend. Who cares that it was spent on one fingernail at a massage therapy, getting that one fingernail repainted? You know what I'm saying? And maybe we see maybe we don't need that extra mani-pedi every single month, or maybe we don't need that cable bill, or maybe we don't need the such and such that's in our luxury, because we could go an extra week without getting our hair done. I don't know. I mean, I'm making stuff up. But you just look, and you're always within it. So this has just changed our lives, and we're in allowance, and it's our spending allowance, and this guides us. This tells us what to do. Now, Gary's not the always wrong. We're just in allowance. So it takes all the friction out because our only agreement is we follow the cash flow system. We follow the allowances, and we stay within that, and the rest of it we don't care. And we don't have to spend days and weeks getting down to the nitty-gritty, because in our personal lives, as long as it's within the formula, it just doesn't matter. Until you dissect it to try to get rid of or to change it, that's the only time it would matter at all. Any questions? All right, so are we ready for lunch?
We are ready for lunch at 2 pages coming.
Okay.
So it would, unless we're going to save.
I'm just worried about people hungry.
Well, so I was going to check in with you.
Okay.
We can, one of the options is to not go as deep on
I can go through these. I can go through these two very fast because
How
I
are
want.
you guys? If she goes through, we have 2 more things she can go through. And I was thinking we would try to do lunch about 1:15. So we've got 15 minutes.
I can do it in 15. Are you okay for 15 more minutes? Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So I think this is all together will make more sense. And I'll talk fast. Let's all stand up real quick. Let's get the body moving. Put on some music, Gare, if you don't mind. Not that. There you go. Let's do a little clapping. That's. All right. We can do this. You guys are awesome, by the way. You make it so easy to be up here. All right, so we're going to cover 2 more things, rapid fast, and I've pretty much laid all the foundations, so that's why it's going to make it this very quick and easy. So this is called SASS. We can remember SASS, right? So this is called SASS, and it's the saving as spending system, or I mean spending as saving system. It can go either way. So it's what I just talked about. So that's right here, right? So now there's a system for saving that makes it really easy. And part of what we need to do to simplify it even some more is to automate. So when we don't have to do this ourselves and it just does it automatically, it makes it really easy to save. And that's why with our investments off the top, this gets automated. So, and then all of the savings. So there's the saving system, spending is saving. So this is called the bucketing system. So close your eyes. Imagine these enormous buckets, like just swimming pool size buckets. Imagine that. Now imagine them filled with cash. And the cash is even flowing over the top and dropping along the sides. And there's 5 of them, and just filled with cash overflowing. Do you like that vision? All right, open your eyes. So this is buckets of cash. What I learned from Jim quick is visualization is really important. So the more we can create images versus numbers, especially as these left-brain people, like Pasha, this is probably very easy for you. You're a creative. For the others of us, it might be a little bit more difficult. But I'm really working on visualization, to think in pictures, to think in images, because they stick with us, versus trying to remember numbers and different things. So the image is buckets of cash. There's 5 buckets as part of the spending as saving system. And the idea here is we don't want our money to be tired. Nobody wants tired money. We want flow money. We want abundance money. So in order to keep our money from being tired, we flow it in the bucket. So this is the flow system. We have our gross income. Now we're going to start flowing our money deliberately. This is part of the flow. So flow, as we've broken it down into categories, and now we're going to automate the flow with these different pieces. So this is the tax bucket, the T for taxes. So for those of us that need to save for taxes, Gary and I, for example, we guesstimate what our taxes are going to be every single year, usually based on the year before, once we do our projections, and I'll talk about how we do that later on. But once we do those projections, then we go ahead and we determine, okay, how much money are we going to need at the end of the year to pay our taxes or quarterly or however you set them up. But then we determine that and we automate it. So off of every check that comes in, we take our tax percentage that we think it's going to be based on that, and we automatically put it in that bucket. Now, what's a bucket? The bucket's the metaphor. What is it literally? It's a savings account or checking account or money market, whatever you want. So this is taxes. That way we have the money there. This is like Uncle Sam's bucket. So we don't want that one flowing over. That one we want. Jason tomorrow is going to teach us how to keep more of our money. Who wants that? All right. So and this is our investment bucket. So in this case, this would be our $15,000 a year, or our per month, every single check, you're taking 15% off the top for our future self. It's not our money, and you automate it. We just automatically, off every check, it goes automatically into the into the investment bucket. And then we invest that money. So at any different time, Abbott calls us and say, hey, we have this rockin' apartment thing. Do you guys want in? And we're like, yeah. He's like, well, I have one spot available because they all sold out overnight. We're like, yeah. So where does that money come from? This bucket. So we have money in this bucket. Now, some go straight into certain investments, but we keep our investment bucket here because we're always thinking of investments. So I'm going to go into this a little bit after lunch, but the goal here is we're changing our mindset. Mindset number one is cash flow, flowing our cash, flow state, cash, flow, deliberate into our 4 categories. The next thing where I want to start moving all of us, and some of us might already be here, but again, it's a real shift and it's a real life changer when you shift this way, is most of us are pretty much consumer mindsets. Even if we're doing this, we're still in a consumer mindset. Life really shifts when you, especially as a couple, become investor mindset. And I don't mean where that can get confusing, again, because this financial planning world is really complex and scary and overwhelming, and I still, can't understand most of it. So I don't mean like become these master investors. I just mean an investor mindset. So Gary and I, in almost every purchase we make, is thinking of it as an investment. Now, what is an investor mindset? What do investors care about? Return. So most of our purchases, we're looking at a return. Even if it's going to a movie, it's like, it could be just indulgence, or it can be that's a recovery, or it's date time, or some investment we're putting that actually gives some return back. Again, that meaning for that spending. So it's getting back in touch. But the investor mindset's looking at a return, and when you start looking at things, again, it's another place that spending changes. The philosophy and being an investor mindset is a kind of philosophy. But investment, so we're always looking at investments, we're looking at different things, and in that investment mindset, and again, we'll talk more about that. So that's that 15%. Now the red buckets are the below the line. So this is up here, these are down here. So these are our red buckets, and these are like our current self buckets. This is true savings. Now, any ideas what the R stands for? Rainy day. I call it rainy day, reserves, and repairs. So the red bucket is saving for at least 6 months of rainy day because life happens. And this is why Gary and I were able to survive for almost, over 9 months of our income really changing when I got so sick. This bucket was full. Now, we drained every last dime out of it, but this is what saved our life. And we had the cash, and we didn't have to sell assets and go into debt. Why? Did we ever think, especially I was the healthy one, the last thing we would have ever predicted that I would have gotten sick and I'd have been that sick, ever in a bazillion years. But life happens. Who could have predicted it? This is what saved our ass financially, and gave us the resources to actually afford care that enabled us to, buy the help that I needed to save my life. But we had over 6 months. The minimum here is to have 6 months of your arm. Why arm? Because it's a necessity. You can get rid of these things. Like you can turn off your cable overnight. These things are much more difficult. So you want 6 months of your arm sitting in this rainy day bucket. Reserves, so that's the rainy day. Reserves are just extra reserves you might need for different things, like your deductibles. So you break a leg and you have a $2,500 deductible. You get in a car accident and there's a $1,000 deductible. So the reserves are those deductibles and other sort of life happens things that you don't expect. And if you're running off the full cash flow system and you have no money in your bank, any savings, then that deductible goes on your credit card. And then repairs. Another life happens. Sometimes the house floods. And you're just doing your best to guesstimate these based on different things. And sometimes the house floods and you're not having too much money in there, but just based on your best guess, 6 months plus some extras, because if the house floods and you have money in the rainy day, you can borrow and pay back. But anyway, the idea here is that of this $540, you're going to split this $540 each month into these 3 different buckets. And you get to decide just based on if you want to split it up evenly or however you might want to do it. But that's it. Any idea what the E is? Education. Now I think what typically comes to mind is education for our kids. So those of us that have young kids, it's funding this one way or another, either through college funds or different things, but it's just making sure you're funding the education. But again, the financial planning books are telling you, hey, do these funding your kids' education, but where does it fit into the entire system? Like, how do the percentages work out, and where does that money come from? Well, it comes here. You put it in education. So that's great. Our kids, their education's paid for. It's all in accounts and stuff, and there'll be zero debt for the kids, 2 4-year college educations, which is another story because it's ridiculous how expensive it is and little to no return. But it is what it is. But what else comes out of that? Self-development. Remember, spend more money and more investment on ourselves and more time on ourselves than we do on our job. So this is for ourselves. So it cost me cost Gary and me, I say me, but it cost me 10 grand to go to the Jim Quick event to get 2 days worth with this master, and it was a life changer. I took Tamara with me. Wasn't it pretty amazing? 10 grand. The offer comes up. How many offers do we say no to? Time's one thing, but usually it's money or not wanting to spend the money. But we shave money. Gary and I shave money every single month. Our kids are funded now, so now the money we shave's in this. It's like, oh, I want to go Jim Quick. 10 grand, it's in the bucket, no big deal. Don't even have to think twice. Just got to make sure I have the time. So I'm an education junkie, and I'm going all over the place, and guess what? It's cash. And it's cash flow into me. Cash flowing to pay them, that flow comes directly to me, and I get to benefit. And actually, all you do, if you're enjoying anything I say, you get to benefit from that cash flow too. Flow. The beauty of flow. Flow. Because if it flows, it doesn't stop. Like the flow comes, if it comes from Jim, it comes to me and it keeps flowing, and hopefully somebody else gets the benefit and goes through you and flows. Isn't that beautiful?
Yes.
Flow. So that's education. We have to fund ourselves, fund our education. If we don't stop, the day we stop learning, the day we stop growing, it's really the day we stop dying, but we get so comfortable. Learning's uncomfortable. We always want to be in some state of uncomfort. And that's learning. And the final one, what do you think that is? Dreams. So I put dreams so that it's red. These are your red buckets. And dreams are savings for things like big purchases that you would pay cash for. So a car, if you don't want car payments, we save. We're always saving money, shaving money into our dream buckets. Sweeping money is what we call it. But vacations. And vacations, we sweep money every single month in all 3 of these. Because remember, saving is spending is saving, saving is spending. So it's always sweeping into these 3. This is full again now, so we don't need to put any more here. This is full. But now we're always sweeping for this. Because these are always going up and coming down, going up and coming down. This one we're okay. This is our self-insurance. So just like you have your car insurance out there and you hope or your health insurance, whatever, you hope you never have to use it, but it's there when you do. But this, this is pretty much maxed out. These are always going up. We fund them, and then until we drain them down. So these are always coming out of the savings bucket. The savings sweep. Does that make sense? So education, write a check, go learn something. Pretty awesome. And then dream, and I think it's necessary. It's necessary. And then the dreams is vacations especially. Now here's another fun thing. We have no arguments over spending money on vacations because we've actually set ourselves a rule. We fund this, and we determine how much, and I'll tell you in the practices section later on, like how much and what we do in case you're curious. But we fund our vacation fund. in the streams. And we always determine, okay, where do we want to go? How much do we think it's going to cost? Blah, blah, blah. We set that, we put it, and then we start sweeping at the beginning of the year until we take our vacation because we allocate how much each month to make sure it's full when we take it. Our rule, we have to drain the bucket. We have to spend all the money in our vacation bucket. Now, how fun is that? Because how many times we don't want to spend on the vacation, and is it in budget, and all that stuff, and you get in an argument, and should we do that? And I mean, just all the things, this normal married couple stuff. It's like, it's the opposite. Like, we have to spend this. And we're, it's like, so it's been hard to even adopt that because, both of us are like, man, should we spend that 15 grand in Italy? We have to. So we have to find ways to spend it. It's like, well, I guess we'll do that Segway tour because we've got to spend this extra $500. So it just makes it a whole different level of experience. And we have the money. It's our money to spend that's been allocated. It's in the allowance for vacations. Again, it's just changing life, and it's forcing us to have those experiences that otherwise would have been too cheap to do because we wouldn't have thought we had the money. So now there's just different life experiences. There's getting on a plane and go visiting someone or whatever little case it is, but it's all funded. No guilt, zero. In fact, quite the opposite. It's like forcing ourselves to spend when it's not necessarily our nature to do so, to make sure that we're experiencing life, that we're not cheating ourselves with things when we actually really have the money, right? Because we're funding, like everything's according to the formula. The investments are going, it's on track, it's taken off. Final ingredient here, sweep, you automate it. You set up these 5 accounts in your bank. You set it up. Remember that home operating account, that main checking account, all the money goes in there. You set from that home operating account. You set up with your bank just automated payments every single month based on your formula, and it just pulls out every single month automated. So these fill up. We don't even touch them once they're set unless we adjust them, and sometimes we do. So it's just all automated, and the buckets get full. Flow. It's just flow. Any questions on that? That's SASS system. One final thing. This is really rapid, fast, quick. So for those of us that have any personal debt, business debt and personal debt are very different. Business debt produces a return. Consumer debt is money spent. So that's the difference. Consumer debt, you spend it and use it. So maybe a difference might be for business debt, we're a farmer, we buy a tractor. We buy the tractor, we get debt for it. So we borrow because we can't afford that $2 million tractor. But then that tractor enables us to produce more yield, that enables us to produce return, and here's the key. That return allows us to pay off that debt. So the return pays for the debt, and then once the debt's paid off, we keep that return. So business debt, that's the difference business debt. Consumer debt, we buy a TV. Do we produce any additional cash flow to pay the debt off? So where do we get the money to pay off the debt? Plus the interest. That's the difference. Very simple way to think of difference between consumer debt and business debt. Piece of cake. And you can say business debt? Not really. We can trick ourselves very easily as human beings. So business debt, consumer debt. Business debt's one thing. Gary and I have business debt. We borrow against lines of credits. We do different things. We pay things off. But, sometimes we're right on, sometimes we're not. But it's business debt, and there's always risk to that kind of debt. I'm not talking about that. This is consumer debt. This is zero return debt, credit card debt, mostly, but any sort of debt. So when we have consumer debt, when we have personal debt, the goal is what? The goal is to pay it off as quickly as possible. And this is borrowing against credit cards. Gary and I borrow against ourselves all the time. So I'm not saying we've got the money and we're borrowing it and paying ourselves back because we're really working to become our own banker. Now we'd rather pay ourselves interest and borrow against ourselves than pay the banks. But that's a different level of conversation. I want to make some clarity there. So this is meaning we're paying an interest rate to someone else out there, and they're getting the benefit of our money. They're producing a return on their money, we're not, right? So with that, debt. This is called our get out of bed with debt system, and it's a blueprint for eliminated debt. So over in our arm, we'll just do it here, is let's say we have 5 credit cards. Let's hope we don't, but if we do, that's okay. We have 5 credit cards or student loan debt or whatever sort of debt that we have. And all the minimum payments go in the arm, right? So let's pretend we have, they would go here. All the minimum payments are in the arm. So now we want to accelerate our payment to pay down our debt quickly as possible. Don't we want to pay it down as quickly as possible? So this is what we do. It's a very simple system. So what we do is we line out all of our debts, all right? And you line them out based on the, not the interest rate, but let's say $100. Yeah. Okay, so based on, yeah, whatever's due, whatever's left on the, the total amount, the words escape, the balance, thank you. So I don't even care about the interest rate. We're not, again, simplify. All I care about is just list them out in the lowest to the highest balance. Now we're going to select the lowest balance that we want to, because this is the one we're going to pay off first. Now, why does interest rate not matter? It could matter. We could choose to pay off the one with the highest interest rate, which in the grand scheme of things could make more sense, but usually it's a matter of dollars and pennies. It's not enough when we start accelerating this. Because the goal is to turn this into practice and pay things off as soon as possible. And remember the little wins? So sometimes most of us fail at things because we try to do too much at once. We try to succeed at things that are too big. We try to, and it's like trying to learn, to become a doctor in 2 days. You can't do it. You can't bite that off. So I just want little wins. So is it easier to probably pay off this $100 or this $500? So once we pay off this $100, is it going to feel really great?
Yes.
So then is that going to give us the psychology to want to pay off the next $200? And then once we pay off this, it's going to feel really great. And it's like, well, hell, that's easy. I'm going to do this. So that's why, versus if we start here, it might not work, or it might be digging too much in our budget, and we quit. And then it just ends. So that's why in this order. And that's why I don't even care about the interest rate. It's just one more thing to complicate things, right? So with this $100, the minimum payment, let's just say that's $10 a month, and that's going to be over here in our arm. Why in our arm? Because we have to pay for it, otherwise there's consequence. But now, we've given ourselves an extra, let's do this $1,000. We've given ourselves an extra $540 a month of allowance to pay our debt off, right? So we'll add a 0 to each of these. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this $540 and we're going to apply it to the principal of that debt. So we're going to pay the minimum here, which when we pay the minimum payment, we're always paying twice the amount of that $100 jeans turned into a $200 pair of jeans. But this $500, we're going to accelerate this towards interest. And how quickly can we pay this off when we do this allowance and put it towards this debt? 2 months. Now what we're going to do, again, the minimum payment of this debt over here, let's say is $20 a month or whatever it is, maybe $200, it doesn't matter. But now that's still over here, but now we're going to take this amount of the $540 that we're allocating towards this and the amount that we're paying towards the minimum balance over here. Does that make sense? That was a $100. So we're going to now put $640 against this one. This one's paid off. Once that one's paid off. Then this was $200 here, so then once this one's paid off, on this one we're going to put $640 plus that $200. And it's the same money. Like month to month, we're spending the exact same amount of money. Do you follow? And then once that's done, this was $300 a month. So now we pay that $840 plus the $300. Boom, boom, boom. Rapid, fast, debt gone. This is how I paid off tens of thousands of dollars of debt and totally switched my life around with all that debt. This is it. And it actually went much quicker than I thought, but it was disciplined. But I had to figure this out in order to pay that off and get out from under that. Because anytime, I don't know if y'all have been in that amount of debt or any kind of debt, but it's no way to live. You can't live happy with a lot of debt. And but you just pay it off, and it's automated. You just automate it, get that automatic payment set up with their credit card, get it out. The more you can automate, and we take our own physical limitations or whatever out of the equation, the better. Then once that's paid off, you just automate the next one. And it's money out, it's cash flow out. It's in the formula, you don't even notice it because we're used to living off this. And then what happens when all those are paid back? We get this $540 to put towards our savings, and then it's 80-20. And then when this bucket is full here, when that bucket's full, we'll have more money that we can either fund these quicker, put more in there, or we can put more here, we can put more to our savings. And so this is where I'll close on this part. But this is where money becomes transformational in a marriage. For Gary and me, this is how we make money fun. Because now, and we've been through ups and downs, we've been through a recession together, we've been through my health issues together, and these buckets are just building and growing, and the cash flow is moving, and despite how much income we make, the wealth is building, and it keeps growing and compounding now with things going on. But we talk about our money regularly, and it's just so much fun. 'Cause it's like, what are we going to do with our dream bucket? Or, hey, let's look at this education bucket. Or, damn, look what our investments are doing. Or, cool, we've maxed out this reserve bucket. Where would we want to put that money? Or, dang, all that debt was paid off. How do we want to do it over here? So it becomes this entire different conversation with money that's a glue to our marriage versus the separation. It's a fun conversation to have versus one that we avoid. It's something we look forward to and actually have money dates or money vacations to be able to look at everything. And it takes time, but the little bit of growth, like before it was little bits of growth that was really fun, and now, they're bigger because the bigger numbers are compounding faster. But now we're in this together. It's so much fun. We have our allowances. We talk about it. We decide together. We talk about what's meaningful. And it's not arguing over the finances or the stupid budget or all the stupid stuff that just was nonsensical before. It's a complete transformation, and it just makes us solid. Like we're solid. It's just a really great place to be in your marriage. So money can be the total glue. We can all build our riches, our lives of meaning, our wealth and our wealth. And it's so much easier to do when we have two that have that purpose together. We're in this together, and then we're just flowing it. And it just grows. And then we can just be out in the world making a difference and making life and the world a better place. So that's it. Thank you for sticking with me through that. Thanks.